So now, this evening, we've got a guest. We've had a few little sort of technical problems. I hope all this works out. One of the formats we've had fun with on this program has been what we call Desert Island Gardens. Now, Desert Island Discs has been a very long-standing British Radio 4 series going back, I don't know, 40, maybe even 50 years, whereby famous personalities are invited on to talk about their life, and every now and again they have to play an extract from a piece of music that's meant something to them. So we've adapted this format, and we're asking our Desert Island Garden participants to talk us through their life in 5 gardens, sharing images of those gardens. And these are the gardens that we would like them to think they might fantasize about if they were stranded on a desert island or in some other situation where they were experiencing sensory deprivation. So anyway, this evening we've got Matt Biggs, who will be very familiar with British gardeners. Matt, are you with us now? Yes. So Matt, perhaps you could explain to those beyond the British Isles, where you fit into the sort of British gardening constellation.
Well, first of all, Noel, it's very kind of you to say that I fit into the gardening constellation, but I'm a gardener, writer and broadcaster. I've directed gardening TV programmes for a while, and I work at the moment on a programme called Gardener's Question Time on BBC Radio 4. I've been there for 20 years or so, and I've still not been found out. I consider myself to be a very fortunate gardener because I started off on a parks department in the middle of the UK, and then have sneaked my way up, mainly because I was fortunate enough to train at Kew. They always said to us as students that if you can train at Kew, then that's the key to getting wherever you'd like to be. I've taken a lot of risks, but I've loved it. And horticulture is such a wonderful world to be in.
So you mentioned Gardener's Question Time, which is one of those great British national institutions that may seem a little bit mysterious to those in the rest of the world, like many of our other more prominent national institutions, such as our utterly bizarre House of Lords, our weird and wonderful monarchy, etc., etc. Can you explain Gardener's Question Time for the overseas listener?
Yeah, of course I would. It is what it says on the tin. It is a gardening programme that is recorded. It's generally pre-recorded, and there are 3 people on the panel. It's been going since just after the war, and we go to gardening clubs around the UK, and members of the public just ask their gardening questions. So, for example, I was on the panel last Tuesday, and we went to the Battle of Britain bunker, where there's a theatre actually. So we recorded in the theatre, and I actually had the opportunity to go down into the bunker itself. So all sorts of locations, and clubs just write in and say, can we come? Sometimes we have garden parties at different locations where we bring in masses of people. The essential structure of it is that members of the public can ask their gardening questions, and we do not know the questions beforehand. So we go through about 12 questions a programme, and it's very nerve-wracking, very exciting, and we work together as a team. And the great thing about having 3 elements to it, 3 people on the panel, is that you chip in your little contribution and you get all the colours. It's like a piece of music, really, the radio programme. So nobody should dominate. You should chip in with your quips, with your advice, with your help, because that's why we're there, and it all rolls along merrily. And I think people are quite amazed what fun we have.
Yes, there's always a lot of laughter, quite a lot of digs, differences of opinion, which of course I think always particularly interesting. It's a terrific vehicle for exploring horticulture. And I mean, over the years, I wonder if anyone's, maybe this is a sort of AI project to take all the recordings, all the questions, and sort of put them into you could come up with an amazing encyclopedia of horticulture, I think, simply from the programme.
I think the interesting thing, Noel, is how answers will have changed, because obviously it's more environmentally friendly. Years ago, just after the war, it would have been bomb it with chemicals, as it were.
Yes, yes,
But
yes.
the approach to horticulture is recorded through the
Yeah,
questions and
yes, I
answers.
bet. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, interesting publishing project there. Perhaps you've already thought of it, Matt. Perhaps you're working
Well,
on it.
there is a yes. It's been done in a very condensed form, but you could imagine over the years how many questions
Yes.
we've had. So when you've got nothing better to do, Noel, that's over to you.
Yes, yeah.
I am
What,
listening.
naive person at the time. Okay, so Matt, what else are you? Gardener's question time, I'm sure, is what we all know you for. But anything else you're involved with at the moment that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I would actually, because Phaidon Books and you write for them as well, Noel. Let's give you a plug, because we're all friends in horticulture. Produce the most wonderful, generally photographic, image-led books on, and in this case, garden exploring the horticultural world. So as they're very kind to me, I have this thing in life that if we all support one another, we'll all get by, and that's sort of part of a gardening philosophy, really. It's like plants standing together. So I just thought there will be plugs for their books throughout this chat, just because they're really good to me, and hopefully they'll give me some more work, to be honest with you, at the end of the day. Can I just first say thank you to everybody for giving up your time to come and hear my select, or look at my selection this evening and hear my thoughts. It's really good of you. I think you're going to find that this is a little bit different from the norm, but when you get to the last slide, you will understand. I'll leave it like that. So here's Clive Nichols. Clive Nichols' images. Interestingly, at the moment, a friend of mine, Sarah, who's she's a garden historian. We're trying to get a publisher interested on a book on Waterperry Gardens, which was just outside Oxford, which is was a gardening school run by two ladies, four ladies, really. So we're hoping that, and I've already had a chat with Clive to see whether he's sort of interested in popping by, because he lives nearby. So if we could get him, and we've also got some Cecil Beaton images and Valerie Finnis, then it doesn't really matter about Matt Biggs, because they've got the big stars there anyway. So did you ever meet this guy, Noel?
I did indeed. Will Giles, isn't it?
Yes, this is William Rodney Sefton Giles. And William Rodney Sefton Giles I met in the 90s when I was working as a researcher on a TV programme on Channel 4, UK's Channel 4, called Garden Club, which I used to co-present. And somebody said to me, oh, there's a really great garden, great character, Will Giles, go and see him. So I found his garden. It was the entrance to the garden that I took, there were two actually, but the way that I took was actually on the gap between two panel fences between two bungalows on Cotsman Road in Norwich, in the east of England. So I squeezed through, I can remember the day, squeezing through these two panels, shuffling along sideways, and then suddenly burst out into this amazing garden, and it was created by Will Giles. Now, I found out a little bit more about him. He eventually became a great friend. We did something else then. I mean, we're following around now, to be honest with you, but Will and I used to lead gardening cruises, particularly around the Caribbean, because he's a big leaf man. He was an inspiration because, well, when he passed away, sadly, of cancer a few years ago now, in the Times, which is one of our great broadsheets, Stephen Anderton wrote of Will Giles, freewheeling horticulturist. And I just thought that was brilliant, because that was what he was like. So I turned up into this, an area of grass, large leafy plants, balcony on the front. Will was an illustrator and botanical artist. He'd suffered from dyslexia, and at the time people weren't as aware of the problems and challenges, but he expressed himself, of course, through images, and he just loved plants. He was a plant nut. So I remember filming him, and he was really good, wore his signature Hawaiian shirts, and just loved exotics. Then what I noticed was that the amount of lawn, in fact, the second time I went, the amount of lawn was starting to diminish, and in were going the plants. And more plants just appeared. He also added, at a later date, so this is a later image, somebody said to him, oh, Will, your house is really boring. So he stuck a balcony on the top. I almost must add as well, another fact which gives this context was that when I first met him, he was living with a lovely lady called Ellie, and he was just getting more and more into his gardening. And one day, and you could call this an ultimatum, call it what you will, but she basically said to him, it's either me or the garden, and she left. So you could tell where his passion lay. And he did say to me it was a really tough decision to make, but he felt that he would get more sort of a lifetime's pleasure by working with plants. And it ended up that his garden was completely bonkers. And I would go there, everyone would go there, it was open to the public. And you could not believe that this exotic style garden was in Norwich. It's a cold part of the UK. It was a south-facing slope surrounded by very high hedging. So obviously that created a nice microclimate for him. But within there was this incredible mind. And he spent all his money on plants and just spent loads of time in the garden, all his time pretty well in the garden, all his money on plants. He had a load of pals who would come around and help him just for the joy of working in this kind of location. And you go, Matt, what did he do in the winter? Well, the answer was that in the wintertime, in the early years, he very shrewdly had befriended the gardener to the Bishop of Norwich. So when it came to the end of September, you know, closing time for a garden like this, he and his pals dug everything up, shipped it in an really battered old transit down to the bishop, and the bishop paid the bills. And that's how he survived. In later years, he actually, should we say, acquired some land and started planting on that, and nobody really bothered about it, so he just carried on. So here, you know, you can see the Thunbergias, the Ensiti, the fuchsias, pelargoniums, but it was his tropical expression, and he had these lovely bromeliad spheres by his door. And in fact, you can't see it here, but his doorbell was a series of knives and forks just hanging on strings. So you would sort of go there and play them as you went in. So it was this extraordinary imagination that created the exotic garden in Norwich. And he planted succulents and cacti, but somehow things like agapanthus, which, okay, we know they're tender, Trachycarpus, we know they're hardy, but he used big leafy plants, and this was very early on, before Christopher Lloyd had done a bit. Nobody had gone big time to just say, let's throw the kitchen sink at it, as it were, and make this one-off garden. Now, within this garden, there were a lot of footpaths, but one of the great features is this. And this was extraordinary. So he decided he wanted to build a tree house, but the council wouldn't give him any planning permission. So he and his pals, using to block and tackle an old Egyptian techniques, pulled in 4 telegraph poles under this oak tree, arranged them vertically, and then he built the house in the tree. And you had a wonderful view over the Coleman's Mustard Grade 2 listed silos in the middle of Norwich. So you could access it by an old set of steps. There was about 40 steps which came from a cider press in Herefordshire. So this garden was an inspiration for several reasons. One, I just loved his free spirit, envious of it. I think pretty much everybody was. 2, the fact that he could, you know, this free spirit broke free. It wasn't constrained, and he was just allowed to do what he wanted. Didn't matter how ridiculous it was, he just did it, and he didn't care. He was an old hippie, so, you know, you can tell he was about free thinking, and he loved Frank Zappa too. So he was about free thinking and other things that would free the mind. But he was the most extraordinary guy with an artistic eye, and as I say, ordinary plants, tender plants, hardy plants, plus exotics suddenly transformed this garden into one of the most extraordinary places that I've ever been to. And I just love taking people there because they could not believe that it was in Norwich. You know, I've got a pal with a garden in Norwich, you know, come and have a look. And they would walk through, and there was this huge reveal, and there was the Will Giles exotic garden. One year, he decided that he wanted to change the theme. So he hired some arc lights and brought in loads of breeze blocks. And he and his pals in the winter created this. No plans, just laid it out. And then he faced everything with brick. He put the succulents in there. He built the pagoda, sorry, the shelter, and there was a pond in the top. So this was just the figment of his extraordinary imagination. Sadly, one year when we went on one of our cruises, there was very early snow, and he hadn't covered everything, and he lost hundreds of pounds worth of cacti. But as gardeners do, because they're bonkers, he just saved up, sorted it out, and went and bought some more. And just finally to show, sorry, there is so he was able to build his tree house in the oak tree, but not on it. And if you look carefully, you can see that there are sections cut out, and around there there is a sort of rubber flanging, so it didn't damage the tree. So the telegraph poles supported the house in the tree, but not on it. And I've got such fond memories of Will. He was a scallywag, he was a rascal, he was a plant addict, he was a total one-off. And I would say to all of you, if you live in the era of a great gardener, as we have done, Beth Chatto, Christopher Lloyd, whoever it may be, then go and see their gardens while the master, the magician, is still alive, while they're still there, while they're creating, because it will inevitably change if it's left to somebody. Yes, they might pass on their knowledge, but there will be a change of styles. So it's really nice to see the master and the mistress at work, and his garden, because it's going to be a question you'll ask, what happened to the garden? His house was in a terrible state because he spent all his money on the garden. And he when he died, he left it to a friend, and it was decided, rightly so, that the garden should fade away. And and a lot of people were really upset. But of course, once Will had gone, the magic had gone. And so I haven't been back recently, and probably won't. But there's something rather romantic, I think, about the fact that the garden died with the gardener. So that's my first one. That's my pal, Will Giles, from the Exotic Garden in Norwich. I'm sorry that you can't go and see it, but the lesson is for us all. Break the rules, be inspired, look around. There is inspiration everywhere in nature and horticulture, or every person who gardens has some idea that will make you think, and Will Giles certainly made you think. Oh, actually, I forgot. I found these while I was looking, but just to say that there's a pair of. He had a box full of false teeth molds, and whenever they had parties, they would incorporate the debris into the walls the following day. I'd forgotten about that, but isn't that wonderful? So it's all these quirky little elements. If you're looking for elements for the garden, this is the adverts. Then there is Elements and Styles by Toby Musgrave, which is another Phaidon book, and there's lots of inspiration there for topiary and structures and all the sorts of things that you need in the garden. And I think it's really important, either through books or preferably through garden visits, to go and see new gardens. I, over the years, have been really fortunate because I've been able to visit a lot of gardens that other people haven't. So, you may have access to the major gardens. Well, you will have access to the major gardens, but also, there's National Gardens Scheme in the UK, which raises money for charity and people open their private gardens. But when I worked on Channel 4's Garden Club and also on Gardener's Question Time on Radio 4, we've been able to go into all sorts of different kinds of gardens. And it's really opened my mind. So when I first went to some of these gardens for research, for example, I thought they were absolutely horrendous. I thought they were awful. But things have changed. And you realize that you can take, even if you decide what you don't like, that's good. Because it means that you avoid things, but it also makes you question, as we'll see a little bit later on. And here's another garden that no doubt Noel will have been to. Do you recognise him, Noel?
I don't know.
You recognise the name, and you would have been to the garden, but it's Cesar Manrique.
Sorry?
Cesar Manrique?
No.
No, okay. So Cesar Manrique was a environmental activist, a sculptor, a painter. He was a protege of Rockefeller. He was born on Tenerife, and the Canary Islands, one of the Canary Islands, in fact, an extremely arid Canary Island. And he studied art for a while, but then was drawn back to his home. And his garden is just quite different. And it's this thinking outside the box all the time. You see, I like everyone else, love the stand, I love Udolph, I love Christopher Lloyd, all the names that you can drop. But the problem is that they constrain, we follow trends. Why do we follow trends? I think we follow trends because we are inspired by what is pleasing to us, and it is the gardener's fine art. But the great thing about the garden is that it is also self-expression. So we create gardens to look beautiful through the seasons. We talk about them as pieces of fine art, but there's a lot more to them. If you look at plants, then you have histories, for example. You have architecture. You have really personal experiences that I'm going to tell you about in a bit. So I feel that in a way, our rather slavish following of trends constrains a lot of our imagination because we want to say, and understandably so, by association, well, this plant came from Sithinghurst or whatever it may be. So we gain our status by association. That's what I feel, and I think it is a bit more complex than that, but that's basically it. And we want to be seen as part of those that appreciate art because art elevates, and also we'd like to be seen as having good taste, and we all gather together and we all enjoy the gardens. It's also to do with balance and colour. What do you want from the garden? Will it just be somewhere to soothe and rest, as it so often is? Is it something a place of peace? I think also as well, we don't use the other senses. I went to a garden of a blind lady. I can tell you the story a bit later on if you'd like, if there's time. But she used all the other senses other than sight. So there's no point in planting in 3s and 5s and drifts because it's wouldn't help her at all. She needed touch and feel and sound and all the other senses. So I think in a lot of ways, the way we garden actually restricts the development of horticulture. So when Cesar Manrique created this cactus garden, it's half an acre and it's near Tavise, if you ever go there. Started in 1977, worked with a local botanist to pull in 1,400 species, including some rare and endangered Canarian species that island floras are under threat. And he was instrumental in actually saving a lot of these by bringing them into cultivation. So it's conservation through cultivation, which is something as gardeners and garden designers you'll be aware of. Lots of plants that we have are endangered or threatened in the wild, or even indeed extinct, but you bring them in to the garden and it's a safe haven. So it took him 20 years to get this sculpted, and it was actually in a pumice pit. So there the soil is really free draining. It's pumice. Surrounding that area are Opuntia fields where they grow cochineal. So the cochineal, the little bug that lives on the cochineal plant, Opuntia ficus indica, actually is all around there. And he decided to turn this into a piece of art, really. And the remarkable thing about this, I think, is that it's so architectural, and I think we should think about the architectural nature of plants and the shapes that we use in the garden. You can think of Roberto Burle Marx, who went organic in all his shapes. And again, I'm just thinking about, think about breaking molds. Think about breaking molds. Don't be slavish because slavishly follow what is there. You've all got imaginations. You're gardeners. You've got knowledge of plants. Try something different. Dare you do that? Who knows? Would you rather just be seen to be following the pack, or are you going to be a Will Giles and do something crackers? Because that's what pushes the boundaries of horticulture and design. So you have these amazing beds full of native species, and it's tiered, as you can see. It's the whole thing is tiered, and it goes, I guess the stars are Echinocactus grusonii, and you don't want to fall into those. Not a lot of weeding, by the way, either, thank goodness, around there. But what you've got there, it's really nature's structural engineering. So it's an artwork botanical garden, I always feel. And there are so many different, there are waxy layers, there are pads, there's concertina stems, there's, acute angles, obtuse angles, there's umbrella, there's smooth, there's hat stand, there's red, there's yellow, there's orange. When it rains, I went there once, it's covered in, you get the wonderful drips on the end of the end of the spines of the cacti. And it's really the garden, I guess, as contemporary art, as modern art, but using the plants, letting, William Robinson wanted plants to express themselves. Well, here the plants are allowed to express themselves, but there are actually cacti and succulents and really just amazing plants. And if you're brave, and I'm not, but you can sort of teeter your way along here, and you can see some of his artworks there. If you go there to the island, there are 6 different very interesting areas that were created by Cesar Manrique, including Hamayas del Agua, with the most gorgeous swimming pool that you'd want to dive straight into, again, organically shaped, white rendering with this beautiful blue, and you go down through a volcanic, a extinct volcanic tube where there's a concert hall, and then you come out the other side. So if you ever find yourself in Tenerife, then for goodness sake, don't miss out. Bizarre place, no trees because it's just a lump of pumice, but nevertheless a great inspiration. And just by the way, I don't tell anybody that I did this, but there is a art gallery there. There's a Manrique art gallery. So I went up onto the roof and I laid out all my kit that I got. I got my hat and my camera and stuff, and then I made myself a label which said something like "exhausted tourist Matthew Biggs," and then put my dates in, and I just sat there frozen for probably about half an hour just to see what people's reaction would be like. So I felt that I needed to become a piece of art myself to experience what it's like, and that was sort of my little homage to Cesar Manrique. And you can have fun, do things like that when you're in Tenerife, because, well, apart from you now, nobody else knows, and the people who saw me would have had no idea who I was. His house is really interesting as well. There is a garden. Again, you can see his use of succulents and structures, and just the most extraordinary way, I think, of turning plants. And I think using plants as natural architecture, that's what I like, as natural sculptures, so that they can, we perhaps do it with aces or something like that, where you've got a plant, betulas, where they are spotlit in the winter, whatever it may be. But here, using cacti and succulents, just let it make you think. What are you going to do? How can you be different? How can you break the rules? How can you bring in? Because what actually happens is when you see something like this, it refreshes the eyes, it refreshes the mind. You might think that that's not what gardening's about, but you can always have something gentle with your grasses and your annuals, whatever you want. But then you could perhaps turn a corner, and there in front of you is this extraordinary piece, perhaps, of nature's architecture. So I like this garden. I love this garden because it's like no other, because it is just totally cacti and succulents. So you might say La Majorelle, yeah, again created by an artist, but not the reliance on cacti and succulents that you get here. So that's another one that I would dream of, and I haven't been there for a while. So the English Gardener's Garden, again, this is the adverts, Phaidon, the lovely book, Blouthar Castle, there you are. So you've got a little bit of nice balance. You've got some images in there and gardens for you to visit if you're ever in the UK. And you're thinking about soft gardens, grasses, following current trends, proportion, golden ratio, all these things that make a garden pleasing to the eye. Right, so here's another one, and I'll be honest with you, I've not seen this garden, but I've seen loads like them. And you all recognise who this is, I hope, because she's a legend.
Absolutely.
And Vivienne Westwood, yes. And she was a punk. She had her shop in World's End Road, sex with Malcolm McLaren. Complete radical, a wonderful lady, and her clothing was inspired. There was a series on the UK television about her and what inspired her. And she spent a lot of the time in the National Gallery, V&A, Victoria and Albert Museum in the UK, looking at old paintings and was inspired by that. So why is she in there? Well, to say, believe it or not, I am an old punk, and I thought she was absolutely brilliant. The whole sort of ethos of punk was great. Doesn't work. They don't seem to rebel these days. I don't know what's happened to the young people, but they don't seem to rebel like students used to do. So what do you think of this? It's in Versailles. You may well have seen it. It's classical statuary, obviously, against a hedge in the autumn. A series of pieces of white marble statuary, beautifully carved. We feel drawn to it because it's, classical Greek or Roman, so therefore it has history, therefore it has status, because it is something which elevates. It is artistic in its appearance. So I think we could just accept that in a garden. We'd have no problem. I have no problem. You have no problem. Then somebody, Jeff Koons, the artist, created this outside the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao. And people go, oh, I don't know, bedding plants. We don't like bedding plants here, even when they're laid out. And William Robinson raged against them. He felt it was his responsibility to break up the bedding schemes and really what he felt the formality of English bedding, which represented a lot of the oppression during the Industrial Revolution. So William Robinson didn't like the idea that bedding plants were laid out in straight lines like soldiers. They were forced in glass houses. When they were finished, they were disposed of. He felt that reflected the change in the mass production and the attitude to people. So we've always thought of bedding plants, perhaps, as a little bit coarse and vulgar. So Jeff Koons, who's known for his extraordinary art, produced this to just try and gee everyone up, I suppose. And it's his terrier, West Highland White Terrier, full of bedding plants. So you might go, classical statuary, yep, I've got it. I can understand that. This, I don't know, it's a bit bad taste, bit bright, wouldn't look great in English sunlight. Too challenging. Very, very strange. So I could tolerate something like it, possibly on a smaller scale, but not something that dominates. But I can still go back to the classical statuary and accept that. So when I wrote the garden book, I discovered a man called Peter Marlowe. Peter Marlowe was a photojournalist. He photographed during the Brixton riots, which were racial riots. He was on the front line in the Lebanon. Sadly, the Lebanon is in the news again at the moment. He also was in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, so he was a photojournalist. But also, Peter Marlowe photographed that I discovered just by chance because I was writing about one of his images in a book, and I discovered that he actually produced a whole set of postage stamps of the windows at the end of the nave of every British cathedral. So he had a set of postage stamps, I think about 8 that he was commissioned to shoot, and here he is in one of his cathedrals, but got so engrossed with the project that he just filmed more. And I said to a pal of mine, I said, there's a photographic exhibition up at St Albans Abbey, shall we go? And it was remarkable because it was anyone who got through the door went, oh, flipping heck, that's Peter Marlowe. You would not believe a garden that he's photographed that I would love to see, but haven't. And it was this. And that's the Peter Marlowe. So it was photographed, and it's near Derek Jarman's garden. And I didn't want to go for the obvious because everybody knows about Derek Jarman's garden, but nobody knows about Margaret's caravan garden. Now, the question that this posed to me is, one is, what's the message? How valid is it? what does it make you think? How do you respond? So one of the things was, look, Matt, you can cope with classical statuary, you can cope with Jeff Koons. Why does this become bad taste? And I think become bad taste, or they become kitsch or whatever, when bad taste is something that is not your taste. So if you have a broad taste, then this is absolutely fine. You accept it as her self-expression. And the thing about gardening is that gardening is self-expression for all. It may be a very rudimentary art form. You may be like a child's drawing with crayons or pencil, but it's still an art form. It's still art. It's still expressing yourself through the garden, through drawing, whatever it may be. It may not be refined art, may not be the names that we've mentioned, may not have the right proportions, but it is an art form. And I think that gardens like this are as valid as anything, as anything. You don't have to like them, but you do have to accept them, because that's her expressing her creativity, effectively, limited though it may be. And I think just sometimes we are too snobby, too narrow-minded in our acceptance of what's there. After all, we don't go and look at cave paintings and go, oh, that's really dreadful cave paintings because they're not sort of three-dimensional, they don't have any shading, you can't see the light or the shadow, they're not using oil paints. We don't say that. We accept them as an art form as they are. What's really interesting about, I mean, I just love this, but what's really interesting about Margaret's caravan is that, you know, it's full of, you know, there's half cared for plants, you know, scrubby bits of plastic. The interesting thing about it is, and you may know this, but I did some research on the Phrygian cap, which, if you have a look at it, there's a massive history about freedom of slaves, that they would wear them, but also, of course, this is the basis of the liberty cap in the Revolution, the French Revolution, and also during the American Revolution. So that cap in itself expresses the freedom, I think, to the liberty to do what you want. And if you want crappy old gnomes in your garden and it makes you happy, then who's Matt Biggs to come around and say, oh no, that's not the way it's done? And I think the best bit for me is the bottom right hand corner, which you can read. I just thought, oh well, that's fair enough, you know, hello, welcome, now piss off. And I wished I'd met Margaret, but it didn't. Seeing this garden and seeing gardens like them did make me think, well, it's a challenge to me to accept that garden as somebody's self-expression. And I just love it. It makes me laugh, because it's some things, like listening to Motorhead or whatever, some things are so bad they're brilliant, and I think that falls into the category. And yeah, I struggle with the little coloured windmills, but the key thing is it's not my garden, so therefore it's nothing to do with me, and I can, you know, I can spend or as long or as short looking at it as possible. And incidentally, we went to a garden at Lamport House near Kettering in Northamptonshire in the middle of the UK. It's one of the original gnomes that was brought into Britain, called Lampy. They call him Lampy, and it's worth $1 million. So there you are. They're not all cheap plastic rubbish. But I love that, because it's sort of confrontational, it's challenging, and I think that's what, you know, a garden should be. So when you go here, Chiswick House, where the Beatles filmed their first video, that was something else we did on Gardener's Question Time. Met a man who and actually saw the bicycle that Ringo Starr rode in I think it was Paperback Writer and Rain were the two. So if you ever look at those two, they were filmed at Chiswick House, and there is a tree that people go and sit on. But that's full of classical statuary. So my question is Margaret's garden as valid for its gnomery as this one, which we like because of its proportions, because of its spacing, because of its golden ratio, because of its classical curves? Is that as valid as a piece of art and a piece of garden as somewhere like Chiswick House? And interestingly, finally in this section, even our friend Pete Adolf broke molds, and he said, hey everyone, I'm going to paint beautiful pictures with plants, and you're going to love them, and we do. And you can watch the wind blow through them. And this is Horse from Worth down in Somerset, where I went in the rain. It was great. A few weeks ago, went in the rain. There was nobody there. Fabulous. But he said, here's a new idea. let's look at decaying plants, let's look at dead plants, let's leave herbaceous plants over the winter. So he in his way was painted with perennials beautifully, easy, not challenging, restful, artistic, all, as a comedian, UK comedian, we used to say, all in the best possible taste. There's no challenges there. But he also said to us, why don't we extend our scope of thought? So just to say also, so another plug, so the Rose book's coming out in April. That's another Phaidon publication, and I've been contributing to that as well. And it's been a really interesting experience, I have to say, all the time, opening your mind, trying to understand about plants that you don't necessarily like, plants that gardening should be a mind-expanding process. Anybody recognize this one? I'm not going to show you the house because you'll know. Anybody walked through there? It's a National Trust property in the Cotswolds. There's a clue. Well, it's Hidcote Manor Gardens. And I don't know how I've got the gig, but I have I'm in the process at the moment of revising the garden guide. And there's a monster amount of work in there. There is Lawrence Johnston there, and that is actually one of his paintings. There's also a painting which I went to see on the back of the kitchen door at Kiffsgate. I want to try and get into him as an artist, because what makes him so good is my big question. Everyone talks about Vita and Harold. I had the privilege of going a couple of weeks ago to interview Sybil Kreutzberger. Again, interesting to hear her perspective on the garden and the amount of work and influence she did. She was a Waterbury student. The amount of work she did. Again, mine is a job of privilege, I have to say. And I'm trying to work out what made Lawrence Johnson so brilliant, and it happened this week. It penny dropped. So there's one of his paintings. Notice colour, lots and lots of colour in there. So the garden itself, if you're unaware of it, is divided into garden rooms. And you go from, as you can see, there's an alpine terrace, winter border, fuchsia garden, bathing pool, poppy. So you're going from room to room to room to room. And there are actually 21 different rooms and then other areas. There are also great vistas. Again, he uses perspective here. So the one end of this vista, it's like a metre shorter than at the other. What he also uses, he sculpts the landscape. So he uses the terrain. As I say, this has all come this week. He uses the terrain to change. So when you go into the garden, you can't see the garden as a big landscape. You have to go from room to room to room. And it's like walking through a silent movie. So what you're doing is you're stimulated by what you see, you're creating your own narrative. So every individual will have a different narrative, or well, maybe some similar, as they walk through. Their responses will be different. The interesting thing is that there are so many junctions and decisions to be made. So the actual decision that you make is, shall I go to the garden or not? And what time shall we leave? Once you're in there, you can decide, do I go left or do I go right? Often there's two gates, there's a pathway. So your perambulation through the garden can be anything, really. I'd love to work out how many permutations there are. I bet there's thousands. Now, what's really interesting about him was that he was an American, came over to the UK and was an Anglophile. So he fought during the Boer War and the Second World War, in the First World War at the Somme. Now, I think, and I'm still working on this, but there was an artists' colony in Broadway, which is a place nearby, including Singer Sargent, Edith Wharton, various other writers, painters. There was also an arts and crafts, and this is an arts and crafts influenced garden. There's an arts and crafts school in Chipping Campden, and I think he just immersed himself in the creative arts. I also think he was affected by the war. Now, I've pitched this one to people and they're not quite sure whether it's my imagination or not. So let me have a go with you. You've got these narrow borders here. Okay, so he fought in the trenches. These are the red borders. The red borders, I think, might remind him of the bloodshed. Then there are 7 steps up to what then leads to a vista beyond, to what are the gates of heaven. They're known as the gates of heaven. They now stay open. And I just wonder, because most people garden as a way of escape, horticultural therapy, that he created this as a means of coming to terms with the absolute horrors that he'd seen. And also the fact that quite a lot of this area is narrow, and then you have to do a left and a right. It's like being in the trenches. He was also an architect, and what makes him great was he actually then, if you go into the house, you go down steps, up steps in the house, you come out into the garden, and there's all these changes of level. So this effectively was his house. He extended the house by making garden rooms, but he was also remarkable because he was a really great planter of plants, and also a plant hunter. So he was passionate about art, he was passionate about plant hunting, he was passionate about design, he was an architect. And you've got Lutyens and Jekyll. You quite often have pairs of people, but I can't think, and you may correct me, and I'd be pleased if you did, but I can't think of anyone who encapsulated the whole thing. So he was sort of plant explorer, because he went plant hunting, plant explorer, architect, plantsman, designer, and he encapsulated everything in one, in one person. And that's why I'd like to take his garden. Just say to you that if you go into the gazebos, there's these absolutely beautiful chairs that have just been made, but above them in I think it's the South gazebo, you sit on there and it's like the Whispering Gallery at St Paul's, and it's hemispherical, and I think it's there so that the wind blows through there, which it will do, but you can still chat to one another and hear each other talking. And I said to them, had anybody thought of that? And they're working on it. Here's the red borders. They punctuate them with blues, occasionally in other darker colours, just to bring them, just as a pause between them. The detailing is fantastic. How often do you go into a garden and think the hard landscaping is brilliant? But here they use what are called staddle stones. So you would have those vertically with these, they're like little mushrooms, and they put buildings on the top traditionally to keep the rats away. He used his colour. You see the colour there, and unfortunately there are no plans, nothing. So they've used old images, tried to identify the plants. There's no books, and they're trying to work out the style of Lawrence Johnson at Hidcote. And there's one of his major trees. That's an Acer that he collected. He went plant collecting with one of the great plant hunters. And the thing that everyone loves is a cedar tree which had the top blown out. Did it, or did it have it cut out? We don't know, but just offset. Again, you did a little bit of genius, and then you've got this view. And it's a garden that I am learning to love and learning to appreciate the genius. Well, I better hurry up because it's got to be done by the middle of October. Right. So I'm going to tell you about this garden, if I can. At the moment, I'm in my 4th year of chemotherapy. And when I first had bowel cancer with secondaries, which has just gone on and on. So when I first went to have chemotherapy in this unit here, I was terrified. So what I would do as a gardener, I would get there early and I would deadhead the daffodils and weed and leave them piles of weeds there, and then go into this really sort of horrible building, really, full of people wearing grey clothes. I now wear colour because I think if you wear grey, you'll bring yourself down. So I wear bright colours, spotty shirts and everything. And it'll either make people happy or give them a migraine. But it lifts my spirit. I take colours in with me. But I look out. I'll try and get to window. You can see it's plenty of glass, window seat. And there it was obviously a sunny day. So they for patient privacy, can't really do anything there. Anyway, I go into this garden and it's rubbish. I'll be honest with you. You as garden designer and gardeners go, flipping heck, Matt, this is just awful. So it's southwest facing, southwest, clay soil, nice layout, wheelchairs can get in there. I go in there after my treatment, sometimes before, and just sit. And I did find out, in fact, I'm due to have a treatment a week tomorrow. It's for my last one of this current 6. I found out that there is a little sort of gazebo there. You can have your treatments outside. So I said, oh yeah, put me in a garden. I'm not sure whether they will, because the logistics won't be great, but I'd rather sit in a garden and look at this. So they call it the fern garden. That's what it's like. It's the functional, everything, but look at the gaps. Just look at those gaps. So it's cared for by volunteers. They're trying their best. This garden is inspirational. I realise that sometimes gardening is not about art. It's not about the fine things. It's about the gritty. It's about the deadheading. It's about the weeding. It's just about being in a garden. It really affected my soul, really, being in a place like this. You're gasping for more greenery. Say I sit in there. Nandina domestica firepower in full berry in the winter has never been so inspirational. Multi-stemmed betula pendula, just in the grass, incredible. So this garden is an inspiration to me at the moment. So I had a thought. This is very current, okay? So Tom Stewart Smith has a link with a charity where it helps people who are who are who are disadvantaged, special needs. So yesterday I sent an email, and it's not quite worked how I want it, because I thought, wouldn't it be brilliant if when he starts his nursery, the people with special needs could help the people with cancer? I mean, wouldn't that be great? Instead of the able bodies helping the people, but the special needs people could help the people with cancer by providing them plants for their garden here. And I'm not a garden designer like you, maybe, but then we could, then it could all be planted up. They could get the ferns out. The best plants, it's on clay, as I say, so the Mediterranean plants do really well, and you get the fragrance, and fragrance is really important. And this garden has been more important to me for my survival than all the other ones that, I indulge in, where it's the sort of, if you like, the superficiality of art. So there's not often allegories in the garden with the plants. You've got backstories, but not allegories like you get in art. But this garden, this is about being gritty. This is about my survival. This is about a few scraggy plants being appreciated more than they've ever been appreciated. And my goal, and whether I will achieve it or not, because I'm limited in what I can do, is to try and get this garden looking great for other people. Now you'll go, Matt, what about Horatio's garden? Well, there are lots of gardens that are like Horatio's garden and all the wonderful gardens, and the other garden, the garden, help me please, Noel, the lady who did, the wife of the person who did the Garden of Cosmic Speculation. They've got Maggie's Gardens.
Maggie's.
Yeah, so Maggie's Gardens, and they've got all the great and the good garden designers, all the big names, bring in all the money. Here's a scruffy little garden, tended by love, tended by people who, who haven't really got a clue what they're doing, but they're wanting to create a garden for the benefit of those who are, suffering cancer. And this garden, I think, along with all the others and every garden that you look at, you think about, provokes you, that soothes you, that calms you, whatever it may be. All these gardens should be sort of swept up. They should be a catalyst for our creativity. They should be a catalyst for our thankfulness as well, because we work in horticulture, we work with plants, we work with nature, we hear the sound of the bees, we're tuned in to plants and the plants world. And best of all, I think we can express ourselves by caring with plants or designing with plants, whatever it may be. So my message is really think outside the box. Don't be constrained by, and break down your, don't have taste if that's what's stopping you from thinking more and challenging you more, and be more open and sort of understanding in what your concept of the garden and gardening and design is all about. Thank you ever so much for listening.
Thank you, Matt. That was interesting and provocative, and yes, not quite what I expected. So great.
I did say
think about.
I did say sort of earlier on, I thought it might end up being not being the normal,
being a bit more radical. No, all better for it. So we do always ask people at the end, if they're stranded on their desert island, what garden tool would they not be without?
Yeah, so a couple of books. So a book. I'll take the fruit manual, just again to be different. Right, I've got a collection of heritage fruit. I've never read it, and it's so I could sit down and actually read. I've got 36 apples in a small area grown as cordons, and they're all based on Edward Bunyard's culinary varieties, and every apple has a different flavour, because as you know, so some taste of spice, some taste of lemon, some of pineapple. They're all different, but I've never read the book. So I thought I'll get round to that. And oh, blast it, I didn't put it in, but it's my mattock. Oh, why didn't I put it in?
Ah,
I beg your pardon, but the tool is my mattock because it means
yes.
I could, dig trenches and weed,
Mhm.
and perhaps dig myself a pit to sit in where it would be nice
Yes.
and sunny. So yeah, the mattock is the piece of kit. So
Okay.
thank you.
Great.
So
Thank you.
thank you.
That was interesting. Excellent. Yes, and some great publications from Phaidon here.
This one, by the way, Noel, is coming out. Apparently, I did check. It's ordered and being shipped on the 24th of the 9th. So I thought you'd
Right.
better have a
Okay.
plug,
Yeah.
and I've contributed to that as well.
Okay. Yes. Well,
Nice.
thank you so much, and very wishing you all the very best with your treatment. Really hope that goes well, and
Thank you very much.
get this up onto YouTube in the next couple of days, where more people can enjoy it and be provoked by it.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, everyone, and stay safe and happy gardening. Stay well and happy gardening.
Yes. Yeah. All the best. Bye.
Thank
Cheers,
you.
Matt. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.